Hey guys, how are you? Having a couple technical difficulties here. Oh my gosh, pain in the butt. Um, so we're just gonna get started. It's been kind of a crazy evening, so yeah, it's about 20 minutes late, but that's okay. At least we're here and at least we're getting started. And hopefully you guys have patience with me because this stupid live thing wouldn't even type. It's just been one of those evenings. So my name is Raven Woods. I am the CEO and founder of Autism Mama Rocks the IEP. And I help striving parents really nail and rock the IEP by creating less overwhelm, a lot more knowledge, and serious confidence. So let's get started. Let's let a couple people hop on, and then we will get to talking about LRE and special education and all that fun jazz. But yeah, it wouldn't let me type in what the title was. So if you're coming on board, make sure to post who you are, where you're from, and we'll get started very, very shortly. So hello, hello, keep popping on. Share this if you know anybody who wants to learn more about the least restrictive environment and LRE when it comes to children and children with special needs. So we're going to kind of dive into this, and I have all my notes, of course, in front of me. Hi, Brandy. How are you? Hi, Christina. How are you? Amy. Hello, hello. Yeah, I had technical difficulties. I'm exhausted. You know, it's just been one of those awesome days. I couldn't even type in what my topic was about, so it was crazy. Um, so yeah. So hello, hello. Share this if you want to. I will definitely give you a shout out if you share, because I know a lot of people are wondering about least restrictive environment. Is it something that you should have your child definitely take part in? Is it something that you don't want them to take part in? It's one of those things where people are just not sure exactly what that means exactly, and if it's something that their child should have or shouldn't have, even though it's within their rights to have. So hello, Sophia. Um, so yeah, just keep sharing and we will get started in about, I don't know, 3 minutes. And hi, Keela, how are you? So keep sharing, and we will get started on the LRE in just a minute. And for those of you who don't know me, my name is Raven Woods. I'm the CEO and founder of Autism Mama Rocks IEP. I help create less overwhelm and a lot more rocking of that IEP and really give you the knowledge and confidence to do that. So truly, I feel that with the knowledge and confidence, every parent has it within them to go and rock this process. As frustrating, overwhelming, and crazy it is, you guys totally have this. It's just learning the process, how it works, and the number one thing is how to deliver and negotiate what you want so that your child gets what they need. All right. So as people hop on, I'm just going to get started. As people hop on also, make sure to post who you are, where you're from, give me a shout out, say hello, and I'm going to get started. If you are watching the replay, hello, hello, welcome. We love you guys just as much as I love all these guys on here with me, and you guys are going to learn just the same watching it later. So, what is the least restrictive environment? Anybody want to post below? What the least restrictive environment? What is that? What do you need to know about it? Tell me. I want to know what you guys know. So tell me what you know in reference to the least restrictive environment. I encourage each and every one of you to post below, even though I'm going to tell you, post below right now what your thought process is in the least restrictive environment. Just go for it. Don't worry about if you're wrong. Who cares? You're going to learn. But just go for it. I want to know what you know so that I can best help you. Okay. And those of you who've talked to me know that it's not about what you don't know, it's what you're going to know and how you're going to use that. So don't worry about what you don't know, but post what you think it is. All right. Hey, Ida, how are you? Okay, so we're going to talk about the least restrictive environment. This is a crazy subject, and lots of us have different opinions on this. A lot of parents, let me just start with this. A lot of parents feel that because it's law and it's within your child's rights to be in the least restrictive environment within the educational system, that that is all that should happen. And I'm going to tell you tonight that's not true, because if the least restrictive environment isn't where they learn best, then it's not the place for them. I know. As a parent, that's hard to hear. I get it. However, this is about your child and how your child is going to learn and increase in their academic success so that they lead healthy and happy, productive lives once they're out of school, right? So, let's talk about this. Hello, guys. Thanks for joining. Okay, so the least restrictive environment, I'm going to use my notes. You guys know that. I always have to make notes for myself. The least restrictive environment is to ensure that children with disabilities are educated in the least restrictive environment. Is important to understand what that means. Okay, so sure, least restrictive environment. What does that mean? Does that mean in the general ed classroom? All right, so how does LRE fit into the development of your child's education plan, so IEP, okay? So these are the questions I want you to ask yourself, and I can post these questions later. Hi, how are you? Miss Hernandez. All right, so what are my child's current levels of academic and functional performance? I bet you guys hear that a lot, academic and functional performance. That's a key term that you guys are going to want to use. I'm going to be putting up a vocabulary list for you guys as well. You can Google them as well too, but it's good to know your terminology, and I call it educational verbiage. Ask yourself this too. What are my child's educational needs? What skills or behaviors does he or she need to learn? These are important questions to ask yourself before you even consider where your child's going to be placed. The next one is number 3. What goals will help my child learn the skills and behaviors he or she needs to make a meaningful educational progression? Okay, that's an important question to answer. And then the 4th question, I'm going to write these questions below after I finish, okay? The 4th question is, what services, including supplementary aids and services, will the school provide to help my child accomplish these goals? Okay, these are important questions to ask before you even consider where your child is going to be placed. And then the last question, the 5th question, is what is the placement in the least restrictive environment where those services will be provided? That is the key thing to remember, okay, is what placement in the least restrictive environment are those services going to be implemented for your child, for them to learn and have academic success? Okay, so those are the questions you really need to ask yourself. And you may be asking yourself, what can be provided in the regular education classroom so that my child is not taken out of that setting? So that's an important question to ask, okay? So supplementary aids and services can be provided to your child, and this is something that you want to have put into your IEP, supplementary aids and services. So if you don't know what that means, raise your hand. I'm going to talk about that, but that's not the topic for today. But if you need to know what that means, raise your hand real quick, or give me some sort of indication that you need to understand what that means, okay? We will talk about it later. However, assistive technology can include a computer, it could include assisted technology, iPads, all those types of things. If your child cannot see, different ways for them to learn is all put into the IEP as a supplementary aid, okay? Because these are aids, not services, right? And all of this is under federal law, okay? So free and appropriate education, least restrictive environment, etc. So each public agency, which is a school system, all right, and this is the law. will ensure that the maximum extent appropriate, that's the important wording right there. Each public agency shall ensure that to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities, including children in a public or private institution or other care facilities, are educated with children who are non-disabled, and that special classes separate from schooling or other removal of children with disabilities from the regular education environment occurs only if the nature or severity of the disability is that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So that is, I just read it verbatim, law. Okay, so what that's saying, which is what I do, I will read something to you, but then I'm going to explain it in Raven's terms, which is basically saying that any school, whether it's a private school, public school, or anywhere that your child is, they are entitled to, at the maximum extent possible, to be in a classroom, okay, that can be daycare as well, with children with no issues, okay? Typical children is what it's normally called, okay? And children that are not disabled, okay? And this is very important to understand that this is the law. That doesn't mean it's the right thing for your child. It just means that by law, they can be in the least restrictive environment to the maximum extent to where their needs are met. Does that make sense? Give me a thumbs up if that makes sense, okay? Because understanding that is crucial. Understanding that, yes, they're entitled and by law, they get to have the least restrictive environment. However, that's only to the maximum extent possible that services can be provided in the most appropriate way in that environment, okay? So that is really important to understand. And in the IEP, it must explain why and how much time your child will be able to participate in Gen Ed, okay, in the regular education setting. So in your IEP, it must literally say how much time and why they're in general ed, and also in special ed or in a more restrictive environment. So if they're going to be, say, half and half, they're mainstream half the time and they're in special education half the time, it needs to be specified in your IEP. What are they in general ed for and what are they in special education for, and the times, okay? I gave you my daily communication sheet. You can use that for each teacher. Anywhere that your child is, that should be filled out every day so you know where your child is and when. So what you need to do also is request in writing your child's schedule and by times. So at 8 o'clock to 8:30, they're here. From 8:30 to 9, however long classes are. 8:30 to 9, they're here. 9 to 10, they're here. And who are they with? Find these things out, okay? So if they're just in one general education class, okay, then you know where they're at and they have a full day, all right? But a lot of us who have children with special needs, our children are not just in the general education classroom. They're in the gen ed and they're also in special ed. I want to know where my child is at all times. And I want to know that if I walk into that school at 1:30 and it says she's going to be at speech from 1:30 to 2:30, she better be at speech or they better have emailed me. I'm very firm and strict about that. And if they have a schedule, their schedule can actually be attached to their IEP. I highly encourage that because then you know exactly where your child is at all times. Now, if the school system has a fire drill or something like that, things are tweaked a little bit, and that's obviously understandable. But know where your child is at all times. It's different. You know, my two older children who are 23 and 19, no, I didn't have to really pay attention to those things like that. You know, I'd get an email if they got a bad grade on a test or something like that. But our children with special needs, it's totally different, isn't it? It's almost like a totally different ball game. And we have to really focus on all these little incidental things that we probably don't pay much attention to because they're crucial. This is part of your hunt and gather, knowing where your child is at all times. Where are they at? If you show up at the school and you go see where your child is at 1:30 and you have the schedule that the teachers and the school provided you, don't you agree that your child should be where they say they're going to be at that time, right? And it's also a way to see where if they're going to their services. So if they're in speech or PT or OT, whatever they're in, you know they're going to that, one, because you're going to get the daily sheet home, but two, because the school system literally gave you an itemized schedule. So that's just important to know, okay? So parents must be informed about the available placement alternatives. So if your child cannot be put into the gen ed classroom because of whatever reason, then you must be told, sat down in a meeting, told in an email, what the alternatives are. Is it, a special education classroom? Is it, you have to possibly do homeschooling? Whatever the case may be, they have to tell you, an alternate way in which your child can learn. Okay? So that's very important. All right, so let's move on. Does anybody have any questions as of right now? All right, we got a lot of people who hopped on. Hello, hello, welcome. All right, so least restrictive environment is a legal entitlement, all right, of a child. It clearly defines what a child needs and the environment in which a child would best flourish, basically. All right, deciding LRE must be done on a case-by-case basis, all right? So like I was saying, if it is a wonderful way for your child to learn, then awesome. But if it's not, and your child is regressing and not learning appropriately, all I'm asking you to do is be open to other alternatives. That's all, okay? You're the mom, you know best. You're the dad, you know best. But just be open to certain things so that if something is an option, if there's an option out there, I highly encourage my parents that I work with to be flexible. Sometimes we actually have to try something to see if it works. And if it doesn't, you hold another IEP meeting and you change it. But sometimes it's good to have trial and error to figure out what's going to work and what is not. And that's why IEPs are not a one-stop shop. So create that environment to where you can really have a trial and error, because then you, the parent, are also going to figure out what's working and what's not. All right, so the school is responsible for making our children feel safe and educated alongside with children with non-disabilities, okay? And this is appropriate, okay? And appropriate means, in the LRE verbiage, means that your child can fit into that setting in the most appropriate way. And if not, then accommodations have to be met in the general education classroom so that your child can fit in the most appropriate way. And that's educational, social, etc. The regular education classroom is the first placement of choice. Okay, so obviously if your child is first evaluated and you're scheduling an IEP and you're getting them placed in a classroom, the goal is to hopefully they can go to gen ed, but depending on their disability and impact of disability, sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes they may need a one-on-one, and a one-on-one is really all they need, and they can be in the least restrictive environment in a gen ed classroom, but sometimes that's not enough. So you have to really tweak and figure out what's going to be the best for them. And that could be they need more testing. That could be more testing time. That could be they need more attention from the teacher. It could be they need their desk placed in a certain area. So it's really important to understand what is going to be the service that your child needs to be able to be in the least restrictive environment. So when an IEP team considers where a child's going to be educated, they must ask what we can provide in the general education classroom for us not to put them in the special education classroom. So if they can say, okay, we need to get these things together so that this child can be in the general education classroom, then that's something that they can do. And I think that's great. So that's something to keep in mind. And when the IEP team considers this, what they're considering is supplementary aids and services, which is extra supports, okay? And that can be assistive technology, it could be behavior strategies, it could be a resource room, it could be changes to the curriculum or assignments, it could be a variety of different things. But understand that a child with a disability can have an IEP, and anything like this can be put into the IEP. So anything that you can possibly think of can go into an IEP. Okay, and that means times and accommodations and services and supplementary aids and everything. Everything can go into the IEP, and I highly encourage you to put everything into the IEP, okay? So do you guys have any questions as of now? I am so tired today. Anybody else have one of those crazy days? I'm sitting here looking at your questions. But yeah, I had a rough day today and I'm exhausted. So I'm sorry if I'm kind of all over the place. So if the IEP teams decides that a child cannot be educated in the regular classroom, and again, you're part of the IEP team, and that's even with supplementary aids and services, then they must consider other options. That can be special classes, special schools, home instruction, whatever have you, whatever works, those things can be discussed. And that's important, you know, be open. And obviously, if you work and you can't homeschool, I would never homeschool. That just is just me. There is no way. So that's just not even an option. So it's in the school system and we're going to figure out what's going to work. And I'm sure many of you are on the same boat. And if you guys are posting questions at the end, I'm going to go through everything, okay? Because I'm already so sidetracked from being tired, so I apologize. It's just really been one of those days, y'all. I had several discovery calls, and I had my child to deal with, and today was she hit her aide and I had to deal with that and behavior issues. And yeah, anybody else have a kind of funky day today? All right, so let's talk about the non-academic setting. I know that's kind of not a place where everybody wants to go, but let's talk about it. In providing or arranging for the provisions of non-academic and extracurricular activities, including meals, recess, and services outside of the school, like, you know, if they wanted to be in, you know, track or whatever the case may be, then to the maximum extent possible, the school has to give that child an equal opportunity to do that. So I encourage, if your child is in special education classes, that their least restrictive environment be recess, PE, music, art, all those types of things, because they're still getting that social interaction. And if they don't learn in the most appropriate way in a general education classroom, then they may learn better in a special education classroom because it's smaller numbers and they will get more of a one-on-one. And typically there's aids and that sort of thing in the special education classroom. So unless you have a one-on-one, they still get that smaller environment. They're then taught in certain ways and they're able to grasp hold and learn better if you have a good teacher. That's kind of a key thing too. And make sure, please make sure that the aides are not doing core subjects with your children. That is not allowed. They're only supposed to assist. They're not highly qualified teachers, and they're definitely not licensed. And I don't have anything bad to say about a paraeducator or an aide, but what I do have to say is I'm a very big stickler when it comes to who teaches and educates. Because how many times have you guys said, my child's regressed, my child's not improving? This is what's going on. Don't let that be one of the reasons. So if you nip that in the bud from the get-go, you'll not have to worry about that, and you can even put it into your IEP. It's in my IEP. I will not allow anybody that is not licensed or highly qualified and extensively trained work with my daughter. And I think that everybody should require this, because then the school systems are going to be required to hire more teachers and more qualified individuals to work with our kids. All right, so the IEP team must consider whether the proposed placement will have a possible harmful effect on your child, or if it will be a positive effect. So they have to determine, and you're part of that team, if it's best to put them into a special education classroom and more restrictive environment, or does it make more sense to put them in the general education environment and allow them to grow and thrive there with the services and assisted technology and whatever else it is that they need. Okay, so it's really important to understand the LRE and that it is a least restrictive environment. By law, they have to start out there if the child progresses and has academic success in that environment. But if your child's in a least restrictive environment, typically that's a general education classroom, then you really need to focus in on those goals. Are they mastering their goals? Are they moving forward in their goals? Are their goals growing and expanding and pushing them further, and teachers having higher expectations for them? So you have to look at the fact that if your child has special needs, and I'm not talking about children, who don't have a whole lot of behavior issues or educational issues, but just have a disability, but it doesn't really affect too much of their learning, because there's lots of children with autism and ADD and ADHD who are highly intelligent and should be in a general education classroom. But then there's those of us, including my daughter, who is not high up on the spectrum, as in high as in, advanced, and low as in not as advanced. She's not high up, but she's nowhere near low. So I would say medium high, but she still does not learn as well in a general education classroom. So myself, I have chosen to allow her to go to PE and music and well, she didn't have recess anymore, and all those different electives with other children, typical children. But then with her learning, she learns with her behavior therapist and the special education teacher and her one-on-one in the special education classroom, and a lot of times in a sensory-based area, because that's where she progresses best. Okay. But I don't know if your all's school provides where a general education child, a typical child, and a child without a disability comes and works with children with disabilities and walks with them to the bathroom or walks with them to lunch and does those different things. If your school offers that, I highly encourage you to request that be something that your child participate in. Some schools require you to sign something, some don't, but I think that's something that really helps our kids thrive. And even if they act out or have behaviors, usually the children who are non-disabled are talked to a little bit. They're usually a little bit older, and they're able to understand that some behaviors happen, and there's always a teacher around. But I encourage that. I think it's great, and it does help our children really thrive, and being around children who don't have special needs. But if it comes to their learning and they're not learning best in the general education classroom, then just be open to other options. So that could be they stay in the general education classroom, but they get longer testing. They may get a one-on-one. They may need to have an iPad or some sort of service to help them focus better, or they do their work on the computer, because there's a lot of computer programs that mimic what is taught in the classroom. So that's something that you can also put into your child's IEP. So remember, anything that you probably think about can go into that IEP. Anything, okay? And down to like I was saying was it last night or Tuesday, down to, certain wording of times and how many times and that sort of thing can go into the IEP. I highly encourage anything you think about, put it into the IEP. Always, okay? To the point of, that daily communication sheet coming home every day, that needs to be in the IEP. All right? So, as you know, children have the right to a free and appropriate education. And this is a setting that's normal as possible. So a free and appropriate education, meaning in a setting that's as normal as possible. And you can only remove children from that setting, even part-time, with the support or adaptive services would not be able to provide that, okay? So this is very important. And the IEP team, which includes you, must make those decisions. So these are just some notes that I wrote down for myself, and I think they're important for you to take note of, and I will write down the questions that I asked that you guys can then write down or whatever you want to do with that, okay? So, oh gosh, we have a lot of questions. Hi, Julie, Brandy, LaShonda, Charvella. Gosh, there's so many of you. Goodness. All right. So let's keep going. So the least restrictive environment, like I said, is a legal entitlement for your child. So if you're gung-ho on no matter what, my child's going to be in the general education classroom in the least restrictive environment, you have that choice. But you have to look at, is this most appropriate for my child to learn? All right. And one thing I tell parents too that I work with is say, you know, if I'm working with a parent who has a child who has severe behavior issues and the least restrictive environment is just not the place for them, and I'm just going to be very frank with you, then you have to accept that. I know as parents, we're in denial sometimes. We hurt in our hearts at the fact that we're not sure what's next for our children and to the extent in which they're going to learn. Can you give me a thumbs up if you agree? Have you felt these things before? Do you feel sometimes completely overwhelmed at the fact that, you know, what's going to happen, you know, the next year and the year after that and the year after that? We all have those fears and those concerns. You are not alone. Okay, so keep giving me the hearts and thumbs up because you guys need to know for yourselves that you are not alone with this. So understand that no matter what, you have to do what is needed and appropriate for your child. You do as well as the school, not just the school. You have to do that as well. And you have to be open to the fact that, you know, a mom I was working with, you know, who has a child with severe behavior issues. And yes, she did tell me I could talk about her, but I'm not going to give you her name. I'm just going to tell you I worked with her. And we developed a plan of action for her based off of her child's needs, but it was not in the general education setting because that was not appropriate for him. And I even would not have advocated for her had she wanted him solely in the least restrictive environment, because that would have been me going against my principles because I knew that child and I knew what they were capable of with education, and they're super smart, but the behavior kind of took over and there was no way that a general education classroom would have been in his benefit. So, but she ended up agreeing with that. But I'm very firm on the fact that we got to look at the whole picture. We have to look at your child. We have to look at the atmosphere of the school. We have to look at what the general education classroom is like. You can even choose what classes your child goes to in the least restrictive environment. That's how much you can dissect it. So that's the cool part. So say, because this is one thing that happened, is science was one of his awesome subjects. He loved science. So he actually went to the general education classroom for science. But then math and reading and other things he had to learn in special education. So these are the things I like to look at when we look at the whole child. Kind of like, you know, a pediatrician, they specialize in the whole child. You know, they don't specialize in, you know, orthopedic or heart or anything like that, but they specialize in kind of the whole child and they kind of know a generalistic arena of the whole child. Well, I like to look at the whole child when it comes to behavior and education. And I like to look at what can we make a plan for that is going to make things smooth for this child to learn, to grow, and to thrive in the least restrictive environment where he's going to do those things, where he or she is going to learn best, where they're going to be the most comfortable. You know, a lot of kids, you know, don't like to eat in the lunchroom. You know, a lot of kids, you know, don't like to sit in the general education classroom because even though they can actually learn there, their anxiety or their ADHD or other issues get into the way. So sometimes a sensory-based type classroom would be most appropriate, or split it up so the anxiety does not deviate their educational process. So it could actually regress because the child's so nervous and anxiety driven in the general education classroom. So just some thoughts here so that you understand that yes, you're absolutely entitled to LRE, but sometimes it's not always best for our kids. And so you have to really, based off your situation, only you, don't look at any other child, only you, your children, and your children's needs, you have to look at the whole picture. And honestly, moms, dads, caregivers, you guys know. You guys know where your child's going to learn best, or you have an idea, or you have an intuition in your gut, you know? And sometimes it takes going to the school and observing. I encourage that from all the way from step one is you have to observe your child in the classroom. You have to observe your child at home. You think I'm crazy if I say go watch them while they're sleeping and just stand in the hallway, in the doorway and just watch them and think. Go think in the shower, think. Go download my free 30-day IEP agenda. We just posted it, I think today. And that'll help you really navigate, because when I say look at your child, really observe them, yes, you're probably saying to me, Raven, I see my kid every day. I don't need to look at them while they're sleeping. But what I'm saying is when you look at them while they're sleeping, you can actually think differently. You know, you're able to take some time. They're really cute when they're sleeping. They're not giving you a hard time. And it's a time where you can just really ponder on, okay, what's going to be best for him? You know, and again, best is words you and I use, not in the school. It's needed and appropriate. So just change best to needed and appropriate. So, you know, just really think. Thinking is that I was talking to a mom today and I was like, you know, go to your, if you're on here, let me know. But I told her, I said, go to the teacher conference, don't talk and just listen to her and write down everything she says. And then I said, you know, when you're done listening to what she says and you've written everything down, you know what I said next to her? I said, repeat it all back to her. So repeat back what the teacher just said to you, because she's going through this process to develop to get an IEP. And so I said, you know, listen to the teacher because they're having a conference, and then literally write everything down and then repeat it back to her and say, if I heard you right, this is what you said. So then you're leaving. You're having no more conversation. And you know the reason I want parents to do that is because how many times do I talk about this? I think I need a t-shirt that says this, hunt and gather. You have to hunt down the information and gather it and then go home and think about it before you can continue to make your plan of action, because you have to gather that information first. So if you go spill your guts to the teacher when she's telling you all the things that you really want to learn and know so that you can create your case, you don't want to go spilling stuff you're not sure you want to spill before you've had a chance to think about it. You know, it's kind of like when we're angry, we may say things that we don't mean because we're just angry and it comes out. And then after we think about it, we're like, oh man, I shouldn't have said that. Or that was kind of rude. Or, you know, things come out quickly when we're at that point. Same thing when you're meeting with a teacher. She may have offended you and you're reading back to her what she said, and she may have offended you about your kid, and you got to go suck that up for a minute before you go talk about it. Yeah, right? So same thing. You don't want to put your foot in your mouth with this. You want to take the time. Don't rush it, because then you're going to come back to me and say, oh, my IEP was a flop, or my evaluation didn't go too well, or whatever. If you take things step by step, which is how I'm writing my course. Gosh, I'm so excited about my course. You have to really think about everything, every step of the way. And I'm going to teach you this more and more. So let's talk about real quick, scientifically based research. I will say this, scientifically based research has shown, and I'm going to tell you this, even after everything I've said, has shown that children with disabilities learn more and socialize more when they're educated with peers without disabilities. I will say that. Okay. But that doesn't mean always in the gen ed classroom. It can be half and half. It can be for 2 classes in the gen ed and the rest, in special education or a sensory-based classroom. Okay? So don't think that just because scientifically based evidence says that children with disabilities learn more when they're socialized with children who don't have disabilities, that doesn't mean 24/7. That just means that they do learn better that way because they mimic. I used to, and this is something to kind of keep in mind, is I used to not allow my child in a special education classroom that had a lot of behavior issues in that classroom because I didn't want my child mimicking those behaviors. Now, you can go and view the child's classroom and you can see if that's going to work for you or if that's even an option. But I highly encourage you to think about those things. And again, it's not personal about anybody else's child because we have to think about our kids and how are they going to learn. So I'm going to be transparent with you and I'm going to let you know my thoughts about this because I've had an extensive amount of experience with it. And I think that, that's something that's important is you going and you seeing your child's special education classroom, and you need to go, a couple times a year and really get a feeling of that environment and see what your gut tells you. Really look at who's in that classroom, what are the different children's needs. A lot of times I love going into the classroom. The kids are so cool. However, one thing that I have to make sure that my daughter is not around is a lot of behavioral issues, but usually that's a different special education classroom. So there's a special education classroom, and then there's another special education classroom for children with more behavior issues, and then there's sensory-based classrooms and so forth. So if your child does not have extensive behavioral issues, or if they do have behavior issues that are toned down around children who don't have so many behavior issues, then I encourage you to make sure to aim for that. And the only way for you to know that is to go and observe. So, because that's something that you need to check off your list as you're doing your hunt and gather is your child in a classroom, gen ed, it could be a general education classroom and there's 2 kids in there that are bothering your child or, annoying them. I've had those situations, bullying goes on unfortunately as well. But a lot of times, our children are triggered by certain actions. And if another child, even in a general education classroom, is doing something, it could be clicking their pencil on the desk that could set one of our kids off, So we have to kind of, and I know, a lot of our kids are verbal in certain ways, and we can find out as parents, what's going on in that classroom that's making my child act out. What's triggering them? That's a big word for me. I love it. What is triggering your child to do this, 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 and this? And that's when you talk about FBAs and BIPs and so forth. And those are going to be another topic for a later time. But you always want to know what's triggering your child because triggers create behaviors and unwanted behaviors. So you always have to know what's triggering your child. It could be the teacher triggering your child in something that she's doing. So as parents, we have to go hunt and gather that information so that we can be the problem solvers. And unfortunately, moms, you can't go always to the teacher to find out the answer to the problem. You have to be the person that figures it out and then goes and presents that to the team in your IEP or your soon-to-be IEP. And then you have to that's where you create the case of, this is what's going on. This is what I've observed. These are the things that you've told me. And this is what I suggest. So when you create the solution to the problem by suggesting services or a different placement, whatever it is, then you're creating a solution to a problem. And a lot of times, if they know that you know your stuff, they will go with you on that, especially if you're not being completely unreasonable. So, many times we have to negotiate, many times we have to give a little, if you do this, I'll do this, or I'll agree with this if you do this, so you have to kind of, that's why I tell parents, pick and choose your top 3 things, because you need to have maybe your other 3 things. Say there's 6, your other 3 things need to be that whole, okay, I'll let you do that if I can do this, So always understand that you need to be the problem solver. And that's even with the least restrictive environment, okay? So go and observe your children in school. Go see what they're doing. What's their environment like? What's their gen ed class like? What's their special education class like? How do you see them interacting with other kids, typical children and special education children? Where are they happiest? Go watch them and eat lunch with them. See how they do in the lunchroom. Are they sensory? Is there too much of a sensory overload? Do they maybe need to have lunch in the classroom, which is not as a least restrictive environment, but some children need that. There was a period of time where many children I know, including my own, had to eat in the classroom, but then they were transitioned back into the lunchroom, and that's something that comes with age sometimes. Sometimes it comes with therapies, but you have to be flexible and workable, because the kids need that from you, and they have to be that way too. So if the lunchroom's not working one week, then you fade it in, the next week. And if it's not working, then you fade it back out, and you just figure out what works. But it's a lot of trial and error. All right. So does anybody know what inclusion means? Go ahead and post. I'm going to start answering some questions, and then I have a couple more things I want to go over. But if you know what inclusion means, go ahead and post it below. So Charvella asked a question, and she said, maybe off topic, but how often should an IEP be given? Well, an IEP is given typically once, but you have meetings, okay? So by law, you have to have a meeting every year. You want to have a meeting, okay? I'm telling you this. You want to have a meeting every quarter, because then your child's goals are broken down into smaller increments. They're more manageable, and they're easier to master because they're reasonable, versus it's kind of like, when you give yourself a year to do something, excuse me, there's so much time there that it's hard to see the end. Same for our kids. So you got to give them smaller areas to work with, and then they feel more accomplished. So the same thing with the IEP. So you have your yearly IEP, which is law. You have to have your annual. However, the other 3 are revisions of goals. They're talking about any issues. They're talking about any additional things you want to add. Whatever it may be, you have 3 others that you have conversations with them face to face. And that's important, because I bet you every 4 months you're going to have something to say. And yes, you can send emails every single day if you want to, but it's also nice to have that face to face. So have your IEP annually, and then you'll have an IEP 3 other times, so every 4 months. And in those other 3, you're reviewing goals, adjusting goals, changing them up, etc. All right. So we'll move on. Does anybody have a question about least restrictive environment? Again, I sincerely apologize for being kind of off tonight. I'm just so exhausted. And as you know, I'm creating a course, and I am spent along with doing my discovery calls and my services that I offer. So it's a lot. All right. So Lasonda says, I didn't know that you can request a copy of their schedule. Absolutely, you can. Does this entail their frequent breaks? Yes, you should be able to not only receive a copy of your child's daily schedule, but when they allow them to have breaks. Now, certain children get ABA and other different therapies and services. So sometimes part of their breaks is based off their behavior within that service. So some of those won't always be accurate, but yes, you can ask for breaks if it's something that's specified throughout the day. And those breaks can be put into the schedule. All right, you're welcome, Sharvella. And Brandy, thank you for helping her. How long after the IEP meeting takes place do you get a copy of the IEP? Well, when you have the IEP meeting, you should that day take the draft home so that you can review it. So I hope, LaShonda, you are not signing that IEP in the IEP meeting. You are so welcome now. I appreciate you too. You're welcome, Brandy. Let's see. That's very true, Amy, the SEC. That's right. It is so that time of year. Thank you. I appreciate it, Amy and Brandy. Okay, so Brandy says schools act like they have the best interest, but it's all about the funding. I bet they made sure they didn't have proof of whatever they said because they need to cover their butts. I learned this the hard way. Make sure everything is in writing. Very, very true. If it's not in writing, what? It never happened. So Brandy said the gen ed school forced my daughter out. How come? Faye Ann says, let me see, can I click that? Faye Ann says I can make the decisions to have her remain in the general education system in the 12 to 1 class, or the school can force her out. The school can't force your child out, so I'm confused with that. So by law, they have to provide a free and appropriate education. So they can't force your child out. But if your child is hindering the ability of other children learning because of their behaviors or other types of things, then yes, discussions have to be had so that both your child and the other children remain able to learn in a very appropriate way. Brandy says, my daughter regressed after being put in a special education school. Okay. Does your daughter have behavior issues, Brandy, or? They did not have general special education at your child's public school? Confused. Julie Jones says, I had a meeting a few weeks ago but didn't sign anything but permission to do update testing. So LaShonda said she was replying to somebody. She was talking about not signing the IEP, but gave permission to update testing. That's always smart because then you can sign and after the testing's done, and then you negotiate and figure out what you need to do. So that's really important. And a smart way to go about things is always gathering information before you really sign that IEP, and then also making sure that what's in that IEP is accurate. So you don't want to sign it until it has everything in there that you want it to have. Now, that does not mean that you are going to get everything that you want. So I've always said that if you go to an IEP meeting and there's a win, then sign it, unless there's something completely that you disagree with. So for example, if you wanted 3 times a week speech and they said, well, we'll just give you 1 time a week. Try to negotiate for 2. But if you don't have speech, sign it for the 1. Does that make sense? So like if you have no speech and you're fighting for 3 times a week and they say, we'll give you 1, well, sign it for the 1 because your child doesn't have speech anyway. So the 1 day is something, right? So if the school's not working with you initially, take that win and then go home and write an email and go back in 30 days later and fight for that second time for speech, so it's not a one and done process. So you want to understand that, they have to learn to kind of see where you're at, and you got to kind of feel them out and see where they're at. And it's important to learn to play their game. And if they want to play, just play it better, okay. My child doesn't have speech. You're going to give her 1 day. I want 3. All right, I'll take the 1. Then I'm going to take you back to an IEP meeting every 30 days until you give my child a second one. You just keep going and you build your case, because once they're in that 1 time a week and say they're not progressing as much, because 1 time a week is nothing. 1 time a week for 30 minutes, that does nothing. So then you go into another IEP, even if you waited 2 months, and say, my child's not progressing. 30 minutes isn't enough. That's not even appropriate for my child. And this is why it's not appropriate. And then you just go, you build your case and state your case, and typically they'll do 1 more day. And so you just keep building, 12 and a half years later, I'm where I want to be, so not that it should take you that long. That's why I'm teaching you now. But you got to understand, you're going to continuously build. Does that make sense? You guys understand that? Be okay with a win. All right? Be okay with a win. And if you ever have questions on what a win is, you have me. I'm sure if there's an advocate in your area, ask them. But make sure that you have a qualified advocate. You can tell if an advocate knows their stuff or if they're educated in any way. You want to make sure that your advocate is educated, number 1. And then also has a child with special needs, because how do you advocate if you've never done it yourself? It just doesn't make sense to me. For me, here's a good analogy. It's kind of like, if you want to lose weight, which by the way, I'm trying to lose 10, 15 pounds. It sucks. Anybody else on that? So do I want to learn from somebody? And I'm a health coach, but things have been, stressful, and what happens? You gain weight, right? That seems to be what women do sometimes. But here's the thing. Do I want to learn from Barbie, who's never had to lose weight? Or do I want to learn from somebody that has gained weight and lost it and has a plan of action to get the weight off? You know what I mean? So knowledge is power. So Barbie may have the knowledge. All right, hear me out here. Barbie may have the knowledge, but the other one has the knowledge and actually did it. You know what I mean? So Barbie has the, do I take knowledge, or do I take knowledge and actually did it herself? So there is proof that she not only was at a certain weight, but lost it all. So I want to learn from her, So that's kind of my thought process. Do you guys agree with that at all? So, if I'm going to follow somebody and I'm going to have them be my, nutritionist or whatever, like I want to make sure they know their stuff, So if you guys get an advocate, say in your area, all right, just make sure that they know their stuff, that they are educated in this arena and have actually done it. And, I am going to show you guys in my course my daughter's whole IEP. Actually, I'm taking out her name, of course, but it's not like I don't say it on here all the time. But to show you how I have things meticulously written, because I think that's going to be an important thing for y'all to see, because it's that important to understand how meticulous you have to be, and not just what you say at an IEP meeting, but also what you put into that IEP. So yeah, that's super important. All right, so give me a thumbs up, maybe some hearts. I'm not feeling good, and you know, all that kind of stuff. So I'm gonna hop off here in a minute or so, but I just want to know that you guys got at least something out of the LRE. If you didn't, tell me. I will repeat myself. I will say everything about LRE again. But in a nutshell, least restrictive environment is your child pretty much being in a general education setting and a general education classroom with a general education teacher. That's least restrictive environment, along with the most least restrictive environment for your child is being in a classroom where they're going to learn in the best way and have academic success. So honestly, wherever it is that they can be with typical children and have academic success, even if it's with services and supplementary aids, go for it, especially if they're thriving and doing well. If not, mainstream them and have them do their core subjects in the special education classroom, and make sure the special education classroom is most appropriate for them, because there's a lot of different special education classrooms out there now. So there's sensory-based classrooms, there's I think ED classrooms as well now, which are more the behavioral classrooms. There's a regular special education classrooms. There's different classrooms now, and you need to figure out where your child fits best and is going to learn best. So you guys good? All right. You're welcome, Amy. All right. So I will see you guys again. I will have my tip. Mondays are my tips. That's Tip Monday. So I'll probably pop on Monday and say hello and just give you a tip. I'm not going to be on for 45 minutes like I was last week. I'm going to try to keep my tip short and sweet, but then I get a lot of questions from y'all, which is fine. And then Tuesday, of course, is the question and answer session on the group. So if you are not a member of Autism Mama Rocks the IEP group, make sure to head on over there and join the group. And we definitely have a lot of fun over there, and a lot of conversation and that sort of thing, in a safer environment, I guess you could say. And next Thursday, we will have another content topic. And if you have suggestions, post them below and I will respond to them. And I'm starting to make a list of the things that you guys are suggesting for content, and we will talk about them. So I encourage you to post below what your thought process is on where we should go for next week, okay? So I will talk to you guys later. I'm gonna go try to get better this weekend, and I will talk to you guys soon. Make sure to PM me if you need anything, and sign up for a discovery call if you'd like to schedule one of those with me. And definitely check out the Educational Vault. It's all set up for you guys. One of the number one things I highly suggest you guys have is the bundle, just because you get the 5 laws, the hour-and-a-half video, you get the evaluation and individual evaluation guide, plus the 8 email templates. So that's a really cool bundle. And make sure that you put the code half off, and you will get half off of the bundle, which is the 5 laws that you have to know. They're the only laws you really need to know. It includes LRE in those 5 laws. With an hour-and-a-half video of me going through each law and explaining to you in detail what all that foreign language means, okay? Because a lot of how special education law is written is not how we understand and interpret it. So go check out the Education Vault, and I will talk to you guys soon. And if you want to share this with those that you know have children with special needs and disabilities, and we will continue to share the love. So I will talk to you guys soon, and I will definitely be trying to get better this weekend. And I hope you guys have an amazing weekend. Take care.